As we start, I'm just going to introduce briefly our panel to you for what you can expect is going to be a really, as I said, important and informative discussion. So Dr. Philippe Couillard served as Quebec's 31st Premier, and before that as Health Minister in the province. He's a neurosurgeon, and he's now a Senior Business Advisor in partnership with Strategy Corp. Dr. Couillard. Rosalie Wyonch is a Senior Policy Analyst with the C.D. Howe Institute and his research strategies for seniors care, and we're going to hear all about her research during the panel. Rosalie, thank you. And last but not least, we have Frédéric Soucy, your President of Couillard Senior Living, which is the largest operator in Quebec, and which also has a large portfolio in Ontario and in the United States as well. And fun fact or interesting fact, Philippe's mother is living in one of Frédéric's residences. Is that correct? And I hope she's being well looked after. Okay. Things are going well. We're all good.
Philippe has never called me about it, so hopefully it's okay.
She's okay.
As of today. Okay, you heard it. As of today, she's fine. Okay, good to know. All right, well, we really appreciate you joining us today. And so let's just get right into the topic. We're talking today about a senior's tax credit. And to set the stage, I would like Philippe to tell us what that looks like in the province of Quebec, because Quebec is the only province in the country that has such a tax credit. So briefly describe what it looks like.
Okay, it's been in place since 2000. And why is it still there? Because one of the mysteries, it's withstood the test of time and changes in government, and it's still there and very popular and effective at the same time. First, it's simple. You just have to have a doctor's certificate saying that you're independent or not. That's it. There's no subcategories and grading and all that thing that become very bureaucratic with time. And then you have to see what expenses you are taking on your own every year that allow you to stay at home. It's a stay-at-home credit. It's not an elderly or senior tax credit. It's a stay-at-home tax credit. And it's refundable. That's the other part that makes it so successful. So there's a maximum amount of admissible expenses and a percentage that is applied to them to determine what tax credits you get. It's going to be 40% within a couple of years. So that's a significant amount. In terms of cash, it means for a single person, independent living, $7,000+ a year. For a couple with severe dependency issues, up to $19,000. So it allows people to stay home or to afford or be able to afford care in one of these homes that you were discussing with the gentleman before us.
What kind of services can people use, like or purchase through the credit?
It has to be services that involve an employer and employee, like a senior residence retirement home is an example. Or you are the employer and you hire someone to take care of your home, do the grocery for you, clean up the lawn, these type of things. And then, of course, you need tax receipts for this, obviously. That's not a minor thing. And then you claim every year your tax credit, and you can have anticipated payments on a monthly basis that allows you to get some cash flow right from the get-go. You don't need to wait until you've submitted your first tax return to start getting it. That's another advantage. But you're eligible if you're at home, if you're in a senior residence, if you live in a condo, wherever you need to be happy and independent. And this is why it has, again, stood the test of time, because normally, as you know, in politics, you've covered it, when a new government comes, it wants to get rid of what the bad former government was doing. Well, in that case, no one would dare touching this today.
Right.
It's one of the rare examples of a tax policy that I've seen where not only is it efficient, it's affordable for government, it's expensive, but government have to pay for this anyway. And also, it is relatively simple to put in place.
Right, and each successive government has enhanced it along the way. So,
Absolutely.
okay, so any politicians out there? It's a good it's a good vote getter, I would imagine. And so let's just set the scene here. There's the aging demographic is very profound, and in Ontario alone, there's 43,000 to 47,000 people are waiting for a long-term care space. There's a housing crisis and there's an affordability crisis. And so that brings me to Frédéric. Yeah, so you're looking at this whole issue of a tax credit from a little bit of a different angle. You're an operator. is it effective? Are you, and you're also in Ontario where there's no tax credit. So let's talk about the differences between the two provinces and what you're seeing.
Yeah, to me, it's a situation where we can call it's more than only a win-win. It's a win-win-win-win situation. So it's a win for the operator. It's a win for the government. It's a win also for our seniors that live in a senior living or need, the services. And it's also a win for taxpayers. And the reason why I'm saying that, so yeah, you're gonna like me maybe after, but the reason why I'm saying, if we think about the benefit, it's really the affordability of having access to senior housing. That's the portion that I know about the credit. And also the tax credit follows the seniors in their care journey. So it's not something that is forced, or it's not a subsidy to an operator. It's really to the senior. And us as the operators, we have to do our best and, provide quality to make sure that we're going to become the most attractive option. And I have an example just to share, and it's going to, because I'm saying it's affordable, but it's still senior living. So we also, so at Couillard, we manage 46,000 units across North America, but we also manage 20,000 units of regular rental. And this is where we compare the two. So if you live in a senior residence, let's say you pay $3,500 per month with all the services, so everything is included, you're going to receive a tax credit of about $600. So I'm just, I rounded the numbers at $617.50. That's the right number if you go on the Quebec website to calculate the tax credit. And if you come, so you're going to be down to $2,900, but if you compare to same quality product and regular rental, you're going to pay $2,400. But when you think about what you receive more on the senior living side, you're going to get, 3 meals, you're going to have access to employees, you're going to have socialization, activities, Wi-Fi, phone, cable, parking, shuttle services. So for only $600, that's the difference between the two. I think it's a good bargain for, for everyone. And for the government, for sure, they're going to save. So I think we're going to share some numbers, but it's, it's going to delay the moment where someone is going to need to go to a long-term care facility.
Right. And there were some numbers that you had told me before that the number of seniors over 75 years old who made the choice to live in a senior residence in Quebec is around 18%. And in the rest of the country, it's about 8%. So I think that says something. And Philippe and Frédéric, you credit the tax credit for this, for what these numbers that we're seeing. Okay. It's making
Absolutely. But one of the, I would say, systemic issues around what we're discussing in this room since yesterday is affordability.
Yeah.
Which is true across the healthcare system and partners, but for retirement homes is particularly acute. When I look at the monthly rents that are charged sometimes in some places, I don't know how people can afford this past a certain age. Of course, some people do, good for them, but it's kind of close to most of the people that it wants to serve. And the tax credit is the one that tips the balance in their favor, that makes them make the decision and makes an operator decide to build a new home, because now we can afford to make the projections that will allow him to get credit to build this home.
Yeah, and we'll talk about infrastructure and building a little bit later with you, Frédéric, but I want to bring Rosalie into the conversation here because you delve into this. This is what you do. You really dig into to seniors care. You research it. You were the author of C.D. Howe Institute reports analyzing scenarios for seniors care. So where does the idea of this tax credit fit into your research? What are you finding? What have you heard? What have you researched on this?
Well, I guess really it kind of fits in as, I would say, a partial solution to a pretty untenable problem. So maybe I'll start with the problem. You don't want to, when we have a problem, then we can think of a policy solution instead of having a policy solution. Too loud?
No, that one's not working.
That one's not working? I can just project if you want. I'm good? Yeah, okay, everyone can hear me. So yeah, essentially, when we're thinking about does the government need to do something, first it's what is the problem, how big is it, and then what's the most reasonable way to solve it. So I'll just start with the problem, which is that it's essentially two parts. One is that we currently do not have capacity in the province of Ontario to deliver care to the amount of people that need it. And we also have high occupancy and acute care beds. Essentially, there are just actually not enough beds in the status quo for how we deliver care. And then the second part of that problem is that for those that can't pay for their own care, we have quite a few issues related to patient autonomy, choice, what they might be able to access is quite limited. So when we have this capacity constraint and we have an affordability crunch, and when you add on top of that, that 1 out of every $4 of provincial healthcare spending already goes to people over 75, you need a solution that will try and address all three of those things at the same time. And that is, well, a pretty complicated challenge. And I would say that the tax credit fits in as, well, partly that it's significantly less expensive to give someone a tax credit to stay in a retirement home than it is to have them occupying a bed in a hospital.
Yeah.
It's also cheaper to have a tax credit than to actually also pay for the nursing services at long-term care. Obviously, these can be different levels of care, but what we really, I would say, what really sort of was the signal that the tax credit was probably the right solution is actually related to capacity and affordability. In Quebec, the rent for seniors' home spaces is roughly equivalent to what seniors pay for shelter and food just out in the market.
Okay.
So it actually means it's a neutral choice. It'll cost them about the same amount after they get the credit, so they get to choose where they want to live, and it's not based on how much money they have. And part of it is that what makes that possible, why it's cheaper in Quebec, not just because of the tax credit, but the tax credit stimulates the market. If seniors know that they're going to move to a retirement home at some point, and businesses know what they might be able to afford, then you actually stimulate a lot of building. And the result of that is that Quebec has double the amount of spaces per senior compared to any other province, and that Ontario's is almost, I will say, shockingly low. There are 3 heavy care spaces per 1,000 seniors over the age of 75 in this province. 3 beds per 1,000 people.
Wow.
So, and we see that in the wait list. You mentioned the more than 40,000 people on the wait list. Well, there are about 70,000 LTC beds. So even if we magically freed up over half of the existing LTC capacity, we would still have a wait list.
Right.
So it's really, would it be a game changer? It would be for some people in the population where it enables choice. But really, it's a pretty intriguing solution that's reasonably affordable, might make things more affordable for seniors, and actually appears more equitable.
Okay.
And that kind of win-win-win doesn't happen in tax
Well, we heard
policy.
we heard win. I think is what we heard from Frédéric. So it's been a great game changer in Quebec. And why so? Because you started a lot earlier? Is that why? And so you never had the problems that we're seeing in Ontario with wait lists?
Don't worry, we have all the problems that you have.
Okay.
There has been no miracle in Quebec. This is a good improvement.
Yes.
But it's not a miracle. We still have pressure in our systems,
Sure.
obviously, and people waiting to get access to long-term care. But it provides an option, and it provides some control to the person, for the person as well,
Right.
which is, I think, the main characteristic of the program.
Yeah. And Frédéric, in terms of building, because you give us the number again of how many residences you have across North America. How many do you have?
240
Are you expanding?
Yes, we are.
And where are you expanding?
Mostly we're going to expand, not in Quebec for sure, because we're going to have 100 residences in Quebec. So we're expanding in Ontario, BC, and in the U.S.
And you're doing that despite the fact that you're not getting the same kind of credit in those provinces as you would in Quebec?
Yeah, so there's different angles to expanding or different options. So we're not going to build in other provinces. We're going to have management contracts,
okay.
or we're gonna buy residences. But we're, what the difference with Quebec, that the tax credit has an impact also on the size of the residences. So the size is, the average is 350 units in Quebec. And when I look at the Ontario market as an example for what I know, so we're more around 150. So when you build at 350 or over, the economy of scale are higher, and again, it brings more affordability to the product, and if you add the tax credit, then it's more affordable for seniors.
Okay. One question I have is that, and Philippe, maybe you've obviously seen the seniors decline very rapidly, and so they might start out very well in a residence, and yet then cognitive issues come up and those sorts of things. How does the tax credit address that?
Well, I can tell you from my own experience with my mom, who was
Okay.
92, soon 93 years old. And she's starting to have, I would say, significant cognitive issues, which brought us to ask for more services to the operator. And of course, this is added to the rent. Mm-hmm. But it adds for the tax credit calculation as well. So the net impact for her and the family is not as large as it would be otherwise. So I was talking earlier about one systemic issue, which is affordability. And the second one is this transition that you've been describing of people coming relatively independent and progressively declining. Added to this is the fact that they come in much older than before. My mom is not the only 90-plus-year-old person in this home. Many of them, and a few hundreds, 100-year-old people as well. So that changes the picture completely. Mm-hmm.
But the credit has helped.
Yes.
And you are building, Frédéric, residences that will accommodate the different levels of care that are required. Tax credit is working well for you.
It's working well, yeah. Exactly.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
If there's one thing, I don't know if it's later, maybe but if there's something I think that could be improved, as Mr. Couillard said, the tax credit in Quebec, it's not perfect. So maybe that tax credit could be higher when someone requires care. Because at this point, it's similar, it's dependent or independent, but the difference, it's not significant.
Would that work, or would that complicate the...
It just makes it a bit more complicated from the bureaucratic side of things. What makes it successful now...
Bureaucracy, right? This is what we're hearing here.
What makes it successful, it's very simple. You just need to go to the doctor and just write and sign that my mom is not independent anymore, and that's it. You don't need to go into subcategories and grading systems and all of that, which tend to make things much longer and much more complicated.
Yeah. Rosalie, have you looked at that? That progression?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that's almost already how it works in Ontario, with some determinations of whether or not you can access tax credits related to doing home renos, or whether you might qualify for home care supports. And the barrier there is sort of labor intensive and pretty resource intensive case evaluation. So if you need nurses or health practitioners to actually make a determination of what kind of care someone is eligible for, that increases the costs to deliver the whole program, and it takes caring labor out of the system. So I don't see that as a benefit, but there is a reasonable argument to be made that if people do require a much higher level of care, that the level of tax subsidization that they could potentially receive could go up to a similar level to what the public costs are for a long-term care home, since private retirement homes more and more are offering more and more advanced services that are equivalent to long-term care.
Right.
And I also think that when we're getting into that space, that's really where it starts to potentially take the pressure off of hospitals and long-term care homes, particularly for those that have resources and might actually want to pay for, maybe a slightly nicer place to live in addition to that, that care. So really it's about, you want to find that fine line between where it's an appropriate level of support, but also doesn't become bureaucratic or resource intensive to administer that, and sort of trying to find that balance. So maybe having 2 categories could be fine, but once you have 2, it's pretty easy to get to 5, and then we're in a whole quagmire.
There are people who earn their living adding categories.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's just move on to some polling, because there's been some recent polling commissioned by ORCA that's shown that Ontarians would support a seniors tax credit. The numbers are extremely strong. 90% would support a refundable tax credit to seniors. So when you look at the results we've got some results here on the board, Philippe, does anything surprise you about that? Is that what you're seeing in Quebec? Is it just okay, sort of math? Yeah, we've been doing this for years. What are you seeing here?
Yeah. Added to this is, I think, a very critical factor. Having been the Minister of Health, I was used of having the Minister of Finance behind my shoulder, checking what I was doing and telling me in a subtle or not so subtle way, don't overdo it, please.
Right.
We have issues. Well, if you ask me how much it costs in tax expense, not direct cash expense, but cash expense by foregoing tax revenues, it's roughly $670 million, which is a large amount.
Yeah.
And you do the pro rata of Ontario's population, you probably get to the right amount. But this is only expenses that will need to be met anyway.
Right.
This is what people should remember. It's not a new need that you invent. These people are just floating right now between the 2 extremities of the system, home and LTC, and they don't have anywhere else to go. So you have to front the expense for them, even if they're not ready yet, in theory, to go to LTC. So it's not kind of an optional expense. Society will have to fork the money to take care of all these people. And I think probably it's one of the best, most efficient way. Now, of course, nothing is perfect. There are some criticisms towards the tax credit. And one of them is it's still pushing people to a solution rather than allowing them a full option of staying home. But, you know, the services that you get at home are not necessarily as good or as constant as they would be in a residence. And frankly, many people do prefer. They miss their home, they've been there for decades, but once they get rid of all the hassles of caring for home and mowing the lawn and taking care of the snow and all of that, they feel immensely relieved. I like to tell the anecdote. I was asking one of our operators in Quebec that is out of business, Monsieur Maurice, Luc Maurice. I asked him when I was health minister, tell me what is the moment where people make the decision that they won't stay home anymore and they need to move out. It's not an easy decision. He said it's very little things, but tend to accumulate. For example, it's winter, and you need to go to the grocery store to put on the coats and the boots and get the car, and get the car out in the snow and coming back and unpacking the grocery. Suddenly, at some point, nobody exactly knows what for. It's too much. They don't want to do it anymore. And this is the moment they start looking around and selling the house and going to these type of resources. And last thing is that with the increase of value in the houses, in the homes, people get significant amounts of cash when they sell their house. So they can invest that money with good advice, I hope, and pay the rents in where they are going to without actually infringing on the rest of their resources.
Right, exactly. Okay, well, thank you for that. Frédéric, what do you see in these numbers, when you see these Ontario numbers? Anything stand out to you at all? Have you,
Yeah, when I look at them, you know, I think, you know, the first thing that came to mind is it's about time that we do it. It seems to be well understood. And to complete what Mr. Couillard said, so there's criticism also in Quebec for the operators in the room, you know, so some of the population are saying that, you know, the vast majority of the credit goes to operators, thinking that we make money out of it, but that's not the case. If you look at the, you know, the Quebec landscape, 500 residences closed their operation during the last 5 years. So it's something that helps to, you know, the way we see it, more the seniors to, you know, to have access to the services, but it doesn't help on the margin. Because when you compare the rents between Quebec and Ontario, there's a difference, but the difference is not because of the services. You know, the cost to buy land in Ontario basically is higher than Quebec, so there's difference. But when I look at the numbers, I think, you know, it would be, to me, it's a game changer, and it's, you know, for an operator. But also, you know, there's no magic in brick and mortar. So hopefully, you know, because I see in Quebec, our government, they want to build more long-term care facility. the cost that we see I'm not sure if they're accurate, but what we read in the newspaper, it's like $1 million per unit.
Wow.
So per bed, not per, no, for residents. And on the private side, we're able to build for 30% of that cost. So I think, the magic is not in brick and mortar, and we have vacancy in the market. So it's a good timing to do it.
Interesting. Rosalie, looking at this, what is there an aha moment in the research or the polling that you're seeing here?
I would say not so much, because this poll reflects many other polls, which is that actually I would say 90% is probably on the low end for some of the estimates I've seen in terms of seniors wanting to have choice about where they live. Now, what remains a bit of a puzzle to me is when there's that strong majority in public opinion, then how does our public system that, is at least somewhat controlled by politics, not then deliver, how does the system not deliver what we want? At the end of the day, we're paying for it, but we're actually paying for more expensive care that nobody wants. So just some other numbers that might be maybe the depressing other side of this coin for there's what we want, and then there's what we get. In Canada, 61% of people die in hospitals, when almost nobody wants to die in a hospital. Compare that to, say, the Netherlands, where it's about 30%. And a lot of this has to do with sort of a historical bias towards an institutional type of care. But also, more recently in Ontario, people's choice has actually declined even that much more. And this is all related to costs, hospital bed capacity, where as soon as someone is designated as an ALC patient and needs ongoing care, the hospital can then charge them the room and board rate for that bed. So at a hospital administrative level, there's an incentive to put people on the long-term care wait list before they might need to be there. Physicians and practitioners are naturally going to be risk averse. So if they think there's risk of sending someone home or having less extensive care, then they won't recommend that. And so the system in a lot of ways actually works against what seniors want, and also, as a result, cost taxpayers more. So part of a tax credit is it gives that power back to the seniors. And I think that a key component of it actually is rent. And the reason I'm saying that is that seniors in Canada today have the lowest poverty rate of any group. Housing affordability is a population-wide challenge. So to only focus on seniors, kind of, we're missing a lot of the problem if we do that. But when you look at where seniors lose their choice or where they might end up in these situations.
This is where this would be important.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is really senior renters. So people that rent their home and don't own are much more subject to market conditions. They're also much more likely to be in the lower income group. So essentially there's this, it's not the majority of seniors that actually need our assistance. If they can sell their nice house that they own outright, they can afford to pay.
This would be helpful for those who you were saying at that lower end, right?
Those with resources have choice. But those that rent really don't. And I don't think that the public or the majority of seniors are actually aware of how truly two-tier our existing seniors care system is until they reach the stage where they're in the hospital and being assessed. And so I think if one thing jumps out, we all know what we want, but we don't plan for it and we don't build the system to get that result.
Well, we'll have to make a little bit more noise, I guess, on that issue. I wanted to mention now too that the Ontario Health has shared with ORCA numbers on hospital transfers to long-term care. Ontario Health says that if the tax credit was in existence last year, it could have diverted 1,950 people to be cared for in other settings instead of long-term care, which is obviously probably the most expensive option. So we'd be saving money there, Ontario government, if there was this kind of a credit there. So, Philippe, you've been in politics, and I'm not going to get you to tell Premier Ford what to do. But
No.
why aren't politicians here, maybe in the rest of Canada, why aren't they jumping all over this?
I think they don't know about it fundamentally. Nobody's told them about this.
You were with Kathleen Wynne for a long time.
Yeah, but we never discussed. We discussed many issues, but not that one in particular.
Okay.
I think if I look at Ontario, the case seems to be pretty strong, isn't it?
Yes.
But I think there's no organized ask right now.
No organized ask?
No, by this group or other groups that say, look, we need to add this to what we do. And the argument against government telling them immediately we cannot afford this, is too expensive. As I said before, this is money that is already spent, in fact, if you think about it. You just need to spend it better and provide more choice for people. And frankly, you do it at a very limited cost compared to what it is in reality. And again, I've rarely seen public policies being accepted so much. If someone was to touch this right now in Quebec in a subsequent election, that would be very serious problems.
They would probably be defeated?
I don't know defeated, but they would end up in trouble.
But
I got defeated for many other reasons.
Okay, so you talk about a big voice and an organized voice talking and advocating for something like this. So what did that look like in Quebec? Who was that big voice in Quebec, if you remember? I mean, you weren't in power at the time.
Frankly, I don't remember when it was brought in. Almost no one noticed in general public opinion. Just blended in.
Okay.
Somebody had this genius idea. I couldn't even tell you who it was, but it got in the system, and it grew in the system. And again, I've rarely seen this, when there's been changes of government many times between 2000 and now, and never has an incoming government said, I'm going to reform that or change that. Or no, you don't touch it.
Frédéric, what would you say if you had a chance to speak with the, the Premier and the Cabinet here in Ontario about the importance of having a tax credit like this, given your experience in Quebec? What would you say?
To me, it would come down to, the financial aspect of it, plus the quality that they will have. Because if you live, I know a lot of seniors, they're saying that they would like to, age in their own home. But a senior residence, that's exactly what it is. Plus, you have access to services and friends. So to me, it's like the best option to socialize. So what I will tell them is to consider the senior housing as one of the components of the of the solution of aging in Ontario, same as Quebec.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Rosalie, when you're doing your research, have you looked at the political implications of this? Would Doug Ford be elected with a massive majority government next time around if he brought this in, or would it be too expensive, do you think?
Well, I'll say I'm officially nonpartisan, so I'm going to only somewhat answer that. And I'm also not the political science mind. Like, politics confuses me most of the time. I have to actually ask the people on the political side.
Same here.
Okay. But what I would say is one thing that I'm quite sure of is that all the other cabinet ministers, like if the health minister is going to go and ask for this, all the other cabinet ministers sitting at the table will look at them and go, you already take half the money.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
You will have to sort of divert it from within the existing other health care
Something
spending.
else would have to go.
Something else might have to go. And then I would also say, just putting on a political hat to play devil's advocate for a second, I would say that there's potentially an intergenerational fairness quagmire that could happen in the media, where if you're giving a tax credit to seniors, the tax revenues are coming from those that work. So there's sort of this intergenerational issue, and just given how expensive housing is in the province, I think it would, it might politically go better if it came as part of an overall cost of living. Let's improve housing.
Yeah, so it's the way you'd have to package it, because as Philippe says, we're spending that money anyway. So what's the big deal?
And I think also that because the public awareness of some of these issues is quite low, that makes the politics a little unpredictable. If the public is really informed about what is really happening, then the public discussion about these policies is a lot more reasonable most of the time. Mm-hmm. But this is a complex situation involving lots of different potential healthcare things that people don't necessarily understand. And then it involves tax policy, which, let's face it, makes most people's eyes completely glaze over. And so it's one of those things that almost, I would think, works better as not a big showy announcement, but as you kind of subtly put it into the system. And then a year or two later, you say, hey, look at all the good we did.
Yeah.
Because I think it could get stuck in the political whatabouts.
Yeah, so that's a good strategy. You know, that's actually not a bad strategy there to kind of lowball it a bit.
And I would specifically recommend having a narrower target population at the outset, because that makes it both less expensive on the government budgets, but also means that you're prioritizing the people most in need. And then once it's in place, the eligibility criteria can be changed. The level of subsidization can grow.
Right.
As we've seen in Quebec, the amount that it becomes refundable changes. So asking for 40% right off the top might not get you anywhere. But if you point out that a third of senior households that rent have core housing needs of affordability, adequacy, and they can't, or affordability, when you have a third that's in need, then you can have a targeted policy for that third that can grow into something else.
Okay, gotcha. All right. We've talked about affordability, so let's talk a little bit about accessibility. And I'm going to ask you about this, Frédéric. How would a tax credit address the housing crisis?
That's a good point. That's what I wanted to brought. So I read in your study a concept that I was not familiar with. I think you called the overhousing.
Of elderly, of people still in their big houses and they can't move out.
And you know, that's something that I believe in Ontario would become another kind of impact, you know, from the tax credit. So if someone lives like a couple in a 6-bedroom house, and they have access to a tax credit, they decide to move to another option, then it's going to free that 6-bedroom house, and you know, another family is going to go live in that house. Maybe it's going to help also on that side, which you know, we kind of don't consider, but it's going to have an impact. So I think it's going to help. It's not something that we live in Quebec, you know, or that we experience, but for Ontario, I think it would be interesting to look at it.
Yeah, and Philippe, you've got the experience of your mother being in a retirement residence. What benefits do you see as opposed to had you been able to if she'd been able to stay at home?
Well, I don't think she would have wanted to stay much longer at home.
Really?
Because of all the pressure on her. She was living alone in an apartment
Right.
after my dad passed away.
Right.
So she had to get, you know, along with all the grocery planning and the cleaning and all of that. And at some point it got, you know, on her. She couldn't tolerate it anymore. And I don't think she would have stayed much longer in her home, which was large, as we just heard. Maybe this 6-bedroom home can be transformed into homes of more reasonable size. You know,
Well, that's what's happening now. I mean, as governments are looking for more innovation in terms of the housing shortage that we have, yeah, absolutely. I mean, something like that might be able to happen. Again, it's that innovation that we've been talking about all day and that creativity, I think, that is required in all of these discussions that we've been having. So how does ORCA get this in front of the Ontario government? Like, for the next election campaign, what's your advice? And I'll start with you, Philippe. I know you don't like giving advice, but you're giving advice to ORCA, not to another government, okay? So what would you suggest? Yeah.
And you have a minister, frankly, I'm impressed, 88-year-old minister. He is the perfect audience to lobby to get that introduced, because he must have issues of his own or in his family, I'm sure. So that's the way it must start. It cannot start through a provider of retirement home or strict organization. It has to come from the grassroots. And seniors just expressing the need. I mean, the need for affordability to me is obvious. The need for transition along the phases of, the normal phases of life is also obvious. So you just need someone to take it and run for it. And maybe, yes, you're right, not putting too much emphasis on it at the start. But, you know, politicians are animals that want to be recognized. So if you're going to spend, let's say, hundreds of millions of dollars, you don't want to throw this out and not have any recognition. And people want to just be told, oh, what you did is good. But it's early. When you introduce it, you won't see any very obvious difference for the first 2, 3, 4 years.
Right.
So that's also another challenge. But I think, presented of these arguments, I think the rational decision would be to go along something of the kind, not necessarily cut and paste it, but something quite close to it.
Yeah. And Frédéric, to you, I know we've heard you can't build yourself out of this. I think maybe that's something Philippe you had said, or somebody had said that along the way, that you can't build yourself out of this crisis. But is there anything that the government, and I'm thinking maybe the Ontario government, could put in place to incentivize you to be building more here, to alleviate some of that pressure?
Yeah, of course. So it's, when we look at, real estate development in Ontario, it's not that it's easy in Quebec, but we find that it's more complicated here. So more taxes, the soft costs are more expensive. Some of the municipalities are telling us that, oh, you cannot have complete or full kitchen. You're only going to be allowed to build a kitchenette. And, to us, we like to have the continuum care, in our building. So that's one thing, if the government can let us have more, options for seniors, that's what we like to receive from the government.
Okay, and the last question to Rosalie before I think I can open it up to a couple of questions. Look into your little researcher's crystal ball and tell us what happens if Ontario does not adopt a tax credit like this. What will it look like 10 years down the road, the situation that we're facing?
Well, I think I'll first say nobody predicts the future, and if any economist tells you they can, be skeptical. We model the current status quo. And so what I can say is if we change nothing and we project the current essentially status quo of seniors care forward in this country, that by 2040, spending on long-term care would be like, here, I wrote down the number. It's 4.2. 4.2% of GDP would actually be dedicated to caring for seniors, and that's it. So 1 out of every $20 of total production would be dedicated towards seniors care. And that would, to get to that rate, even if we continued increasing health spending more than GDP growth as we have in the past, almost every new dollar of healthcare spending would need to go to seniors care, which means no new dollars for public health, no new dollars for hospitals, and healthcare spending already makes up half of program spending.
Right.
So essentially, if we change nothing, it will eventually bankrupt all other programs, because we will always give the hospitals more money when they need it. And healthcare continues to grow, but over looking at a decade or so of the past public accounts, you can see real crowding out of education spending and justice spending. And now that we're in a bit of a, shall we say, slightly less economic prosperity, you're starting to already see some of those cracks bubbling up.
Right.
I think the one that got me personally the other day was a senior couple that had moved to Ontario to care for one of their elderly parents, and then had moved back to Halifax, and they're now living in a tent. They don't necessarily require care, but if you're over 70 years old and living in a tent, we have failed.
Right.
So 10 years down the road, I don't want to see how bad that could get. I think we're actually 10, 20 years behind already.
Right. So we need something now. Okay. On that sunny thought,
Sorry.
I would like to thank Dr. Philippe Couillard, Rosalie Wyonch, tell me your last name. Wyonch. I knew I had it. And Frédéric Soucy. Thank you very much.